So let's just start today with language. Obviously, I'm going to be speaking with the English language. You might need to do some translation with your own language. But in terms of language, when we talk about sexuality and we talk about relationships, there are some particular words that we have to identify some things. And some of those words, some of us feel very close to. Some of those words we feel like are really important. We want to protect them. But also some of those words we can feel very distant from. And some of those words also can make us feel quite uncomfortable. So let's just take a moment to start with, take a moment with ourselves to check how we're feeling about some words. Words like queer, for example. In English, queer is a word that a lot of people have reclaimed as a powerful place of identity. It's also a word of culture, the queer culture. But some other people hate that word because it reminds them of homophobia. It's a word that we used to use to insult LGBTQ people. But now it's been reclaimed. So it's a word that people love and some people hate. Just take some time what that feels. Maybe you have an equivalent in Greek. I don't know, but check what that feels like for you to be with those words. Gay. What comes up for you when you come up with this word? LGBTQ is another one. Some people know exactly what it means. Other people can be a bit confused with that. Kink. It's a word as well that for some is a real strong place of identity, and other people are afraid of it because they don't know enough about it or they're afraid to have those conversations. Polyamory. It can be uncomfortable, not really understanding even how to start a conversation about it. And trans. In England, there is a lot of very strong, very emotive debate about trans rights. And it also happens in America, and it's happening in other countries. What does that feel to hear this word, to be with this word? So just take a moment. When we think of LGBTQ, it is LGBTQIA+++, and those are, again, lots and lots of different letters, and some people find it difficult to really understand what it all means. And so just very briefly, for those of you who don't always know what that means, it means lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer or questioning, intersex, for the I, and the A is asexual. And then you've got the plus and plus because we recognize that there's a lot more diversity. Even within asexuality, for example, there is a lot of a different range of asexuality. And then there's many other diversities that we can't put all into some letters. And that's why we include the plus. But all of these groups of people, very different groups of people, are under the flag that now is on the screen. Now we call the pride flag. And even this flag is not the most recent one. There's one with the yellow bit at the end with a purple circle, and that means intersex. So you might have seen this flag before, you might have heard some of those words. Again, just take some time to check what it feels like to be exposed to those words. Are there some that you really understand very well, others that you don't understand very well? And how does that feel? If you don't understand some of those words, how comfortable would you feel to start those conversations? A more kind of inclusive acronym that we have now is GSRD. And GSRD is basically including the whole of the diversity of gender, sex, sexual orientations, and relationship diversities. So in the G, that's all the a big range of gender that we have. We recognize in our profession that we don't have just male and female genders. We have non-binary, we have trans people, we have third gender, we have a whole range in between the male and female, including agender, which is not feeling any gender. In the S, sex, we have sex as the biological sex and sexual orientation, which are two different things. The biological sex is a diversity too, because that's when we include intersex people. Intersex people is very much a biological sex diversity. And sexual orientation is all the big range of how people identify their sexual orientation, which is who they are feeling romantically and or sexually attracted to. And within that range, on top of that, there's also what we call erotic diversity. And erotic diversity is some particular things that people feel, they identify with in terms of their sexual attraction. And that can be people who have a kink, people who have a fetish, and people who engage in BDSM. Some people engage in kink and BDSM as a sexual activity amongst lots of other activities, but other people identify with it as part of their orientation. Relationship diversity means that we recognize that it's not just monogamy or non-monogamy. It's, again, a whole range of different relationship setups. For some people, they may say that they're choosing a particular type of relationship, but for other people, it's very much a diversity element to it, meaning that if they are in a relationship that doesn't suit them, their mental health will deteriorate. So some people might identify as polyamory, which means that being in monogamy could be harmful for them, and vice versa. And the D is the diversity. And the diversity is to recognize that all of those things, all of those elements, gender, sex, sexuality, sexual orientation, relationship orientation, erotic orientation, they're all classified under some of those words that we've seen, plus many other words, and that words do change, and one person's word might be different from another person's word. So diversity is recognizing that there isn't only one definition for everybody, and that words won't fit everybody. They will fit some and not others. So it's very much about accepting that if queer for me means something very important, it's also important to recognize that for somebody else, it might not be a positive word. So those are some of the words in the sexuality diversity spectrum, some of them that you might have seen, maybe others that you haven't seen. Within sexual diversity, of course, we include heterosexuality, because heterosexuality is part of the diversity. There is a lot of diversity in heterosexuality, as well as lesbian, queer, polysexual, being with more than one person, monosexual, being with only one person, androphile, attracted to masculinity, gynophile, attracting to femininity, demisexuality, attracted to people after establishing a romantic relationship first, sapiosexual, attraction to the mind, to the people's thinking, to people's philosophy. So those are only a few words, and some people might identify with different words at once. Some people might identify with heterosexual and queer, or queer and sapiosexual and gynophile. So that's what we call intersectionality. Intersectionality is when people identify with different identities that kind of merge together in those intersections. Relationship diversity is the same. Those are just only a few words, but there are many more around. And it's, again, to recognize that it is not one relationship setup is better than another one. They are all different, and some really thrive in some relationships and they would not thrive in other relationships. Throuple is three people together. Monogamy is mostly monogamous, but occasionally non-monogamous. Consensual non-monogamy is people who have multiple relationships of different setups. Polyamory, it's romantic relationships, several romantic relationships, and so on. WB, I don't know if you have that in your own language. That means friends with benefits. And gender diversity is also lots of different ones. And here are only just a few. Some people can identify as genderqueer, others prefer non-binary, others prefer gender fluid. It's very much about the words that you feel close to and the words compared to the words that you feel distant from. And all of those are valid identities, ways of identifying gender. And there's more that comes up. People identify with new words and new things. So we have to keep in touch with the language as much as we can, as much as possible. But what we're really talking about today is not just all of those words and all of these introductions, definitions. What we are really looking at in our consulting room is the impact of heteronormativity, mononormativity, and cisgenderism. And what I mean by that is that heteronormativity means that it's the mindset that heterosexuality is the gold standard and everything else is alternative, strange, or weird. Mononormativity is the mindset that monogamy is the right way to be and everything else is alternative and weird. And cisgenderism is the belief that being cisgender is the normal and everything else is abnormal. So this is the important bit to listen to in our consulting room, because heteronormativity and mononormativity and cisgenderism doesn't only hurt LGBTQ plus people, it also hurts heterosexual people. It hurts everybody. And the reason for that is because there are many heterosexual people who do not fit in heteronormativity and mononormativity. Plenty of heterosexual people want to have multiple relationships. Some heterosexual people are into kink and therefore they might identify as queer. And some heterosexual people do not want to just do the thing that society tells us we have to do in order to be successful, like getting married and having a house and having children and so on and on and on. This kind of like pathway that society tells us we should have. So those are the important bits to think about. And this is why adopting the queer lens for your consultation with everybody, not just LGBTQ people, but also with your heterosexual client, is really beneficial, because the queer lens means that you can expand your mind in how you're going to be working with your clients and what kind of inquiries you might want to make with your clients based on what they come in, especially if they want to explore the sexuality or their relationship styles. So this is for you just a few bits of questions for you to think about, just as self-reflection. If you have a monogamous relationship who decides to open their relationship, how do you feel? How do you feel about that? If a man is watching porn every day, what comes up for you? What are your first reactions? And where are those reactions from? A long-term relationship who decides not to live together. Do you find that weird? Are you questioning, oh, is there something wrong with that? Could there be something wrong or not? A long-term relationship who decides not to have children. What comes up? There might be some values that you have that are based on your society or the culture that you grew up in, maybe the religion that you grew up in. Maybe it's something that you always thought was the right way and never really questioned a different way. A monogamous relationship when they have one weekend a year when they are not monogamous. How does that sit with you to know that there might be some couples who have one weekend a year not being monogamous? For some, it might think, oh gosh, I would never want to do that. For other people, actually, it might bring some envy. What do you feel if somebody is telling you that they go to a sex club every weekend? What about a man who identifies as a man but wears dresses and makeup? And what about a woman who identifies as a woman but does not want to shave her legs, shave the hair on the legs? And what about a person who has sex with all genders? What do you feel about that? What comes up? And you might want to see if there's a difference between your clinical thinking and your personal thinking, your personal opinions and your clinical opinions. Because in the area of sex and relationships, often clinical opinion and personal opinion can become quite confused. So on that note, now let's go and let's check about more assumptions and biases that we have if we don't have the queer lens, and check if having the queer lens, meaning being more erotically and relationally queering your consulting room, what might happen to that thinking. So if a client tells you that they don't experience any sexual attraction with anybody, would you think that this is because of past sexual trauma, or would you explore asexuality? So that's quite an important one, because often as clinicians, we make some assumptions about somebody who has no sexual desire. It's very easy to automatically think there might be a problem. If you have a couple that comes to your consulting room and one is a man and the other one is a woman, and they come for couples therapy, do you assume that they are heterosexual? Or do you leave some space in your room with your queer lens that perhaps they might be bisexual or they might be pansexual, even though they are heterosexual looking? And if you leave room in your mind for that with your queer lens, then what inquiries would you make that could be different? What about a client who tells you that they are only sexually aroused when they practice BDSM or a specific kink? Would you think this is because of childhood trauma? If they can only be sexually aroused by one thing, surely there's got to be some trauma around. Something went wrong in their development. Would you think that they are addicted to kink? Or would you think that perhaps it could be a person's erotic orientation? If a client identifies as polyamorous, would you think that they have avoidant attachment style, or they're avoiding monogamy because they have intimacy disorder? They want to be polyamorous because they want to hide in all those relationships and not really show up. Or perhaps they are part of a relationship diversity spectrum where there might not be an issue. If a client who identifies as a gay man tells you that he goes to sex clubs every weekend to have unprotected sex, how would you feel about that? Might you think that this client is self-harming? Or perhaps he's a sex addict? Or would you explore how this behavior could be normative for this person? Maybe this behavior is functional. Maybe this behavior is safe or safer, because unprotected sex doesn't always mean unsafe, or does it? What do you think about that? Would you go first thing into the root of what is the problem about this, or more about let's look at what is functional? Sometimes we make an issue when there might not be one. So as part of the queer lens that you can adopt, there are some specific things for you to consider in terms of working with GSRD, that's gender, sex, relationship, diversity, that's everybody, including the diversity of heterosexuality. Demonstrating cultural humility and cultural competence is an important one. That's what we have just done right now. Right now, we are just looking at our cultural humility. What is it about my own thinking that is based on some assumptions and some biases that I might be having that is not always clinical, but also maybe part of my cultural or moral value base that I have in my personal life compared to my clinical work. We all have them. So we have to continue to demonstrate to ourselves, to continue to practice cultural humility, because new words will come, new understanding of diversities will continue to emerge, and we will keep learning about that. So staying culturally humble is very important. We also have to understand the impact of oppression, how much it affects the mental health. A heterosexual person identifying with a kink will be seen as abnormal in our society. And so that person might have adverse effect of oppression. Of course, LGBTQ people are oppressed as well. There is still homophobia, biphobia, transphobia everywhere in the world. And it's the same with people who are not monogamous. They are judged very quickly and very easily. And the same with women who decide to have a vibrant sexuality and not fit into the mother role. That also can be a place of oppression. And because there's a lot of oppression in the world, we have to be trauma-informed. Trauma-informed meaning that we have to understand that when we have a client that comes in that does not fit with heteronormativity, mononormativity, and cisgenderism, if they don't fit with that strict norm, they are likely to have encountered some trauma and some high stress situations. The contemporary knowledge of sexology is also very important. We have done some of the work today in our conversations. For example, just really thinking about erotic diversity, sexual orientation diversity. All of that is part of contemporary sexology to try to really understand diversities rather than pathologizing people. The world of psychiatry has made grave mistakes in the past, pathologizing sexual orientation diversity and erotic diversities. The contemporary sexology is the opposite. It's giving us a broad lens to understand how people have their sex life and the intimate relationships without pathologizing. And the integration of JSRD theories, those are the understanding of minority stress. What does minority stress does on us? Microaggression, intersectionality, all of that will come into the room definitely most of the time. And it's important to think about this because, for example, somebody who might be abusing alcohol might actually do with the fact that they are experiencing daily minority stress. And practice a commitment to social justice. I think it's also a very important part of working with people of all sorts of diversities, because the mindset of social justice is to help the client think that if they feel broken because they don't fit in society, it's actually not that they're broken, it's society that is harming them. So often clients will come to the therapy because they feel distressed inside, but then if you can help the client think that the distress does not belong in their brokenness, but it belongs in society, being heteronormative, mononormative, and cisgenderists, then suddenly they can externalize their sense of defectiveness. And so that's part of social justice. But of course, another part of social justice is all of us getting together and learning from each other. That's also an important part. So just to conclude, the point of being erotically queer and relationally queer is that it helps everybody. It's a language of social justice. It's a language of contemporary sexology. And it's very much to move away from the binary thinking of them versus us, heterosexuality versus LGBTQ, or the binary between minority and majority. Instead, we can think human diversity. and moving away from the binary of heterosexual versus queer, because we know that in heterosexuality there's plenty of queerness and vice versa. So contemporary sexology and gender, sex, relationship diversity and queering our practice is really about allowing everybody the freedom of self-expression without this automatic fear of being pathologized or finding a problem when there might not be one, and to accept human diversity as a whole. If you want to know more, you can read the two books, Erotically Queer and Relationally Queer, when there are some fantastic chapters on all of those subjects that we've talked about today and even more. And I'll be very happy to be in touch with you. If you want to be in touch with me, this is my website, and you can also follow me on social media. I post things on those topics on a regular basis. So thank you for listening.